talking about teams and stakeholders basically lowering the estimates of testing activities. So I'm
Mm.
assuming this is a context where there was an actual estimate being given and it's basically being taken away from you. So have you been in that situation, and do you have any ways of dealing with that without, upsetting people?
To make sure I've understood this correctly, so it's kind of like where you say to test a feature you need 2 weeks, and they're like, okay, you have 1 week. Is that
I think that's what's happening. Yeah, I think this person's having a
um
common experience where they've said it's 2 weeks, they've been given 2 weeks, and then suddenly now it's 10 days, 4 weeks, for 4 days. Basically, all their estimates are always being cut short, or their
okay.
actual time they're being given is being cut short. And how do you deal with that?
So I would unpack them in a few different angles. The first one would be why they're trying to push back. So do they have an expectation that you are overestimating and you should be able to do that job within a shorter period of time? And then if that's the case, trying to address that. So being like, being fully transparent with maybe there are like a few key people who are trying to shorten testing, saying, look, I'm asking for 2 weeks because we need this amount of time for setting up the test. We need this amount of time to review them. We need this amount of time for execution, this amount of time for retesting. So then, my first thing would be to tackle is like, why are we having this conversation in the first place? Assuming that doesn't work, because I'm pretty pragmatic, so I very naturally, I'm like, if you're not going to give me what I need, then I'll give you the best I've got, but in that context. All right. Then the other thing, which I actually generally tend to do, is I prioritize the tests, and as a risk-based approach. The way I have had to deal with it is run the tests I can within the amount of time I'm given, and then I say, look, then if you're not going to give me more time, because you talk about like time, scope, there's like a third, resources, there's like some sort of triangle. If you're not going to give me more time, then then it's not going to finish. So then I say, what I'll do is I'll finish testing what I can, and then I'll communicate with you after the outstanding risk based on what I've done so far. But I also have an idea in my head as to how much I could cover in the shrunk down time, and what I'm pretty sure the outstanding risks will be, and then I push that again onto them. But generally, I think, linking back to what I said earlier, is people underestimate how some things take when it comes to time. Like they think that we just like click around, and it's like, how long does it take to click around? Like, and so it's like this misunderstanding of testing, or it's a misunderstanding of all like unstable test environments, or if you're having to retest things, how you can like bleed time into the back and forth. So I would just push back on that. Admittedly, I haven't experienced that as much lately as I had earlier in my career. But I think that's also to do with the fact I've become a lot more forceful as I've gotten older. So, yeah.
I think, again, though, that breaking down why you are that forceful is probably will have a brilliant answer to this question as well. But I think you'll probably hit on the things that you've been talking about, as in, you're very pragmatic now. It's like, well, I believe, given everything you've shared, I could find you really useful information in 10 days. But I also know I could find you really useful information in 1 day. Like I can work with the time you give me, but if it is, like you frame the context, right? If it's high risk, highly critical things that we're changing, I will do the work in a day, but I'm not going to feel that confident about the product as a whole. So I can do it, but as you always said, put it on you. So if you want to give me a day, I'll do my best in a day. I will prioritize the best things. I'll do the best things, but I'm not. It wouldn't be my approach. Like that's what kind of way I frame it. Or sometimes I have gone the other way and just pushed straight back and gone, no, sorry. as a team, we are not going to achieve the quality we want if you only give me a day. I'm sorry, it's just not going to happen. And if we do it, I'll put it on you. And, you know, when it all crashes and burns, like, don't come blaming me or blaming the team. You know, you did the time that you gave us.
As long as they understand, like, I mean, I think the key part is, like, as long as they understand, like, if you've presented to them why you've given them this estimate, and they, any sort of risk they're accepting, they you don't want them to turn around and say, oh, but I didn't know this. Hasanta didn't tell me about this thing. Then yeah, that's. But yeah, I think I'd also go back to just being transparent and just showing them, like, because as I, from the outside looking in, people don't quite realize how much time goes into testing, and I think that's why it can get shrunk down. So.
It's like you can read my notes. That's what I wrote down. I went, there's something in here about transparency in education. So, you know, if they still have that perception that you mentioned in one of the earlier answers, that testing is done this way and this is how it's done and these are the steps. Of course, when you say that that's 10 days and in their head, they're like, hang on, I could do that in 4 days.
Yeah.
Because obviously there's a knowledge gap there, right? There's a gap in their understanding of testing or your understanding of what they want. And if you get rid of that gap, hopefully the whole idea of estimates and expectations.
And then another thing where I've seen the time of testing get shrunk is, like, let's say you had, and this gets a bit more challenging, it's like, let's say you have a 1 month for a project. So then it's like any more turn from testing actually comes from something else. So that means the developers have less time. And then that's like a trickier conversation, because it's not like you're saying 3 weeks plus 3 weeks. You've now got this 6-week period, and then developers, what has happened to me is they don't actually, so they don't, now that I think about it, they don't actually try to lower the actual estimates of testing. They just run way behind schedule, and then I get given less time. They don't even have the audacity to warn me. And then you see it happening, you're like, oh my gosh, you've like just started this work. I should be starting testing now. And then that's kind of what's ended up happening. And when that
happens to you, Nicola, I mean, are you quite vocal immediately about that?
As soon as I realize, yes. As soon as I realize, but it's people obviously sometimes don't like to be obvious that they're going to do that. So as soon as I notice, I give people a heads up and say, look, we said we needed 2 weeks. It's looking like at this rate we're going to get a week and a half. Realistically, more like a week. So I'm pretty vocal. I also pick my battles. Because some things you're like, oh, okay, like 1 or 2 days less, that's okay. But if there's like this pattern of constantly trying to shrink testing, then there's like a problem. There's a larger problem at play, where it's like testing's being disrespected, in my opinion, if you're constantly going to try and eat into that time that people said that they needed. And then that's another issue altogether, where you need to think about how testing is perceived in the organization. Again, have transparency, education, help people understand the value of testing. But then in that case, what I just described is a symptom of a larger problem.
Yeah.
And you'd have to tackle that symptom as opposed to just what Hasanta described.